Welcome to episode 140 of the Hunting Party Podcast. I'm not Euripides from WoW Insider, Out DPS, or Call to Auction. I am Ollie Sonder from the Hunting Party Podcast.
And I'm Darkbrew from thebrewhall.com and the Brew Hall on Twitter.
And this is Frostheim from Warcraft Hunters Union, WoW Insider, and Frostheim WHU on the Twitters.
If you want to participate in the chat room, just type, the sky is falling in the chat window, and you'll be prompted to register.
And speaking of, why the heck did you steal Darkbrew's line? Speaking of the live chat room, today we are joined by, let me reset this, by Everest, BM Jager, Elapide, Esnavip, Foxtrap05, Gangorl, Gwyrir, Havtor, Homer Jade, Leylewin, Morgothel, Mullingrew, Shroud Viper, Syndra the Hunter, Slugslinger, Solar Knight, Tay Yogurt 1, the real BU, War Vinny, and as always, your lovely moderator, Ollie Sonder. If you have any questions for us or topics you want us to discuss in between the massive info dump of buffs and nerfs, you can go ahead and send those in a private message to Ollie Sonder, who will carefully consider your questions, determine whether or not we're actually going to answer them based on your response to this question, which is a classic. Where is Euripides today? He's not at the podcast. Where is he?
No, he's not.
It's also...
I think Leylewin has a good idea, so hopefully she'll send us a question because she sent us some information about where she thinks he is today. So, and it's very disturbing, by the way.
It's also worth noting that that today's phrase to type into chat room is doubly meaningful. The sky is falling, because holy cow, did we get Hunter nerfs galore dropped on us in the beta, conveniently timed for this weekend, which is none other than the Perseid meteor shower tonight and tomorrow night. Peak meteor shower time to go watching for shooting stars. We're talking about 100 an hour.
100 an hour? Wow.
Tonight and tomorrow night, it looks like, very excitingly, tonight in my region anyway, will be cloudy.
Of course, right?
Yeah. I
don't know what I'd be able to see here. We're too close to the city. We got a lot of city lights. Like, you don't see any stars in the sky or anything like that. So I'm not sure what the viewing is like in our area.
Yeah, you got to get out of the city.
Urban.
Yeah, no, you got to get out of the city. But, most cities, if you're not in New York or something, you can usually take like a half-hour drive and hang out on the hood of the car and have a good view.
We have the local college has an astronomy department with a telescope, so they like to open it up the rooftops to stargazing parties on the weekends. So I imagine that's where they'll be.
Alrighty, well, I think that it's worth mentioning that there is a news announcement, although for the people downloading this, it might be a little late. But Blizzard servers were hacked, and Blizzard reports that the hackers did get access to usernames and encrypted passwords. So they didn't get your actual password, but they got the encrypted version, which in theory they could try to decrypt one at a time.
Sure.
But Blizzard is recommending that everybody change their passwords just to be safe. The security vulnerability has been closed. They did not get access to any credit card or billing information. But if you use that password for other stuff, you should change it in the other stuff too. If you just use it for WoW and you have an authenticator, as well you should, you're safe anyway!
That's right. So, although I do use an authenticator, but yes, I would, just to be safe, I went ahead and changed my password, which is probably long overdue.
Yeah, I did as well, and it was also one of those, where I was like, do I really need to change this? Because I have an authenticator, and I'm like, I would just be a dumbass if I didn't take 30 seconds to do it. So, take 30 seconds. Don't be a dumbass.
Yeah, I did it in part two because, and I don't know how this would impact anything, but, Blizzard has set it up so that, you don't always, at least I don't always get prompted for my authenticator. Now, you can go to your account settings and change that so you 100% of the time get prompted for the authenticator, but I guess they look at your IP, your address, or something like that. If they see the same one over and over, they say, all right, you're good. It's probably you, and they let you in without having to do the authenticator.
I appreciate that setting, and if somebody tries to log in from a different computer, they'll always get prompted the first time for that authenticator. Otherwise, the other news we have is the massive, massive wave of hunter nerfs.
Yes. And the XP nerf. This is just a minor
X,
general thing.
the XP nerf was a little screw you move, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I logged in. It was weird, and I didn't really, and they didn't even mention it. And it wasn't until I logged on to was it MMO Champion, and they had the announcement. But I logged into the beta the other day, and I was just sort of looking at my XP bar, and I was scratching my head because I think, when I logged out, I know I was like 1 or 2 bars away from hitting the next level. I'm pretty sure. And now it was like way back. I'd lost, it was like 3 or 4 bars, and it looked odd, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And I figured, oh, it's just me. And then I saw that note on MMOC saying, no, Blizzard increased the XP to get from 85 to 90, which kind of stinks.
Mm-hmm.
Not happy.
Normally in the beta, this isn't a nerf to the XP that it would be
No.
alive. In the beta, they speed up leveling so that you can kind of get through stuff faster and get to the new abilities and stuff. And it's really kind of an odd decision to slow it down, unless they're just trying to get the patch to line up with what they're going to be putting live.
Right.
Which is the best thing I can think to make sure they don't accidentally give you super speedy leveling on live when it finally releases. But so if you're not level 90 yet, it's going to take you longer to get there on the beta. So as much as the sky is falling this weekend, I mean, we did get a bunch of buffs in addition to a bunch of nerfs, and we did get a bunch of nerfs, as we talked about last week, for good reason. We got a whole bunch of buffs, and Hunter DPS was crazy, insane. Everybody was noticing it. Hunters were noticing it and talking about it. On top of that, there was also weird rotational things going on, like, survival hunters using arcane shot instead of explosive shot in their rotation. I will tell you the overall impact of this is that Hunter DPS dropped by maybe 15%-ish on the beta.
Okay.
It did sort of adjust things from one spec to another. Actually, I saw Zahara did some spec DPS analysis that it looks really close to what I was seeing, although we were doing it at significantly different gear levels. But basically, without question, marksmanship is the lowest DPS spec right now. Marksmanship is going to need some help. But as we just saw, lots of number changes still happening.
Absolutely. And Hera, now she tends to do her testing with like the heroic, like tier 14 level gear, I think, which is like the best gear that'll be available in the game, which is sort of so she's looking at the top damage that you can possibly get out of these specs, which is not a bad way to do it.
Right. And I tend to look at it, at least for right now, I've been looking at it with, good gear, but lower level gear. Like, I'm including the sets in normal mode, not LFR, but I'm including the normal mode sets because you definitely want to include set bonuses in the calculations. But otherwise, I'm not going to anything heroic. I kind of try to do the gear that I think the largest percentage of raiding hunters will have access to is usually my rule of thumb. So lots of Valor gear and stuff.
I think that's a smart idea because it'll be a long while before anyone's really in full heroic gear outside of like the top few percent guilds that actually clear that stuff immediately.
But the interesting thing is, despite the different gear levels, my numbers and Zahara's numbers lined up really, really closely. And what I saw was that BM and Survival were both really, really close to each other. Zahara's numbers showed pretty much the same thing, that BM was a little bit in the lead, but I mean the amount that BM was in the lead, it looked like it was usually under 5% difference. And so that's the kind of thing that, in practice, and I'm not sure if Zahara's modeling the glyphs yet or not, that's one of the things where it's like, in practice, there could be, we'll have to see how well BM plays, because right now, in Cataclysm Live, if BM modeled at 5% higher than Survival, BM in practice would be lower because they've got these obnoxious bugs. And so it'll take us a little bit to see, and a lot more testing to see whether there's extraneous numbers that are going to skew the perfect world theory crafting math that we do. So we'll see. But anyhow, it looks like BM and Survival are really, really, really close to each other. And Marksman is a little bit behind and definitely needs a little bit of help.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you thought it was like an overall 15% nerf, and I think the thing to keep in mind with that's okay if we're still in line with everybody else. So if 15% less damage from where we were, but we're still able to top the meters, then we're okay, you know.
Right.
But if we're now at the bottom, well below the other DPS classes, well then they've over nerfed us, and that's a problem. And I don't know that we know if that's the case yet or not. I don't
know.
Other classes
And
were hit too, I believe.
Yeah, it's really rough. At this point, you pretty much have to rely mostly on simulation craft numbers, and you have to rely that they have their numbers right for all of the classes. Because, normally we look at real world data to determine this. We look at raid parses, we look at averages or medians in the raid parses, we look at medians of the top 200 to sort of clear out some variables. But, we don't have access to that on the beta, and we don't have nearly enough data on the beta. So, kind of got to rely on simulation craft to compare one class to another class, and I haven't heard any updated stuff on what it's like, because keep in mind, other classes were also getting changes, and there's other classes that didn't get changes that Blizzard kind of posted, here's our priority list, and they go, yeah, we think hunters are pretty well tuned compared to the other classes, or certain other classes right now, so there's probably people that are like also horribly out of balance that they are going to be the first target, so it'll be a while before we know. So let's see, going through the changes, going through some of them as quickly as possible. I thought maybe I would just rattle down this list.
Sure.
Specific numbers aren't that important. Arcane Shot was nerfed like maybe 30% or so. Serpent Sting was nerfed like 20%. Steady Shot was nerfed a little bit. Cobra Shot was nerfed a bit. Aim Shot was nerfed a lot. More on Aim Shot later. Chimera Shot was nerfed in an amount that's difficult to determine. Same thing with Explosive Shot, because the data mining from MMOC was like both updating formulas. So like the formula it had before was wrong, so we can't compare it from the data mining perspective. And I've been looking at combat ratings rather than refiguring out those numbers lately. Wild Quiver, interestingly, was nerfed, which I think may well have been a little bit of a mistake. And it wasn't nerfed a lot. I mean, it was nerfed like 15%. But given the fact that MM's a little bit behind, maybe that wasn't a good move. Black Arrow was nerfed a little bit. And pet basic attacks were all nerfed 20%. That's also going to have a minor nerf effect on Stampede. And the Frenzy proc was nerfed from 10% down to 8%.
Yeah.
But it's worth pointing out that the Focus Fire, which consumes the Frenzy stack, was buffed.
Yeah, that was buffed
substantially from 6% to 8%. And keep in mind, it was 5% just like a week ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, what this means is, like, if you're a BM hunter, your pet gets stacks of Frenzy, and that increases your pet's haste. And then you press Focus Fire, you get rid of those stacks and give yourself a bunch of haste. And what people were finding was, like, it was actually a DPS loss to press that button and transfer that haste from your pet to you. So what they did is they went, okay, well, it's going to give your pet less haste, and it's going to give you more haste. So now it's worth pushing that button. I think it's a decent synopsis.
Yes. So, I mean, it looks like with the nerfs, they really kind of hit the signature shots for sure, and, pretty much all of our rotation abilities seem to get the brunt of the damage. But they did buff us a little bit too. I mean, it wasn't just that. They improved some things as well.
Yeah, and some of it was buffs, some of it, but a lot of it looked to me like a lot of it was intent on balancing the talent tiers that give us DPS. Specifically, what did we have? Barrage got buffed. Glaive Toss and Power Shot all got buffed. Glaive Toss is still the clear winner, by the way, for single target. So, I mean, if you're doing
even over Power Shot, so it's better. It's better than Power Shot in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear right now. I'm hoping that in the next round of tweaks, which, by the way, I think we are going to see more Hunter tweaks, but that's probably going to happen like 2 patches from now. Because my hunch is the next one they're going to hit the other classes that they didn't hit hard, and then they're going to go back and start a lot more fine-tuning the numbers rather than really, really big, broad tuning. But yeah, so right now, if it's a single target fight, you still want Glaive Toss. Blink Strike was buffed magnificently.
Yeah.
It was buffed 300% essentially, 3 times as tough, which is good.
And which is good. I guess the question is, how bad was it before? I mean, was it really
It was
bad, not worth using, or
Yeah, no, it was a DPS loss before. You would literally press the button to cause your pet to teleport behind the target and do 200% normal damage, which, is 200% of a pet's melee strike. That's not a lot of damage,
no?
even if you could hit it fairly often. And people were like, wow, pushing that button looks like it's worse than pushing Cobra Shot, so screw you. So they buffed it up substantially, and it's actually now worth using for BM. For BM, Blink Strike is pretty good. Link's Rush also got buffed, which also makes Link's Rush pretty good for BM, I believe.
Yeah, and they're both on the same tier, so because BM's going to have to make a choice there.
Right, and I think it's only BM that has to make that choice. And
everyone else is Murder of Crows. Then is that
right now it's looking like Murder of Crows is still the winner for everyone else. But we say that they'll have to make a choice, but that's not true. Once we get more fine-tuned on all of our numbers, we'll just figure out which one's right. And that's the problem with having a tier that increases your damage, is we'll find the right answer. Thrill of the Hunt was buffed, so over 30% chance to proc it. It still looks like it's not worth taking. Just take Fervor or Dire Beast. But Thrill of the Hunt is still kind of substantially slow. Dire Beast and Fervor, they're both pretty competitive with each other. Focus Fire, we already talked about that. Oh yeah, and there was some minor buffs to some pet abilities, Demoralizing Screech and Monstrous Bite.
Yeah, I think that was just there was, I think, a blue post somewhere in there about bringing those, basically their global cooldowns in line. The idea was so that their whatever debuffs and things are that are meant to have sort of like 100% uptime. This sort of helps to compensate that and accommodate that, so that you don't have these things dropping off, wearing off before the pet can reapply it, kind of thing.
And so I think the couple things to stress about this is a really, really good example of we are late in the beta, and late in the beta is where they start balancing the numbers, where they really start worrying about number balance. And this was a massive amount of changes, both buffs and nerfs. Huge, and there's no way that you can make this many changes and get it right. So there is going to be more changes, and there was a post that a lot of people that unfortunately scared a lot of hunters, where they were like, well, here's kind of where we're at with the classes. Like, this class needs a lot of work. And like, it got to hunters, like, hunters they're tuned. And people are like, oh my god, they're not going to do anything. We're done. Oh, our DPS is too low. That's not the case. They're still going to do more stuff. That really just gives you a priority list, right? It's like, imagine our DPS was half of what it is. Okay, there might be another class that is that severely bad. Maybe their DPS is twice what it should be. But there's just other classes that are higher on the priority list, but they are going to come back and do at least one more tuning pass as they see how these numbers play out.
Yeah, I would suspect that to be true too, and it's just kind of interesting to see how they go about doing it, because I mean, obviously the numbers were at a point where they didn't like them, and they bumped a bunch of things way up, and it was too much. But then they kind of bumped some things down and moved other things up. I mean, they just didn't move like the giant slider back down somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that when it comes to tuning the DPS.
Right, because because they were doing two things here, right? They were both trying to reduce hunter overall damage, but they're also trying to balance these talents. Like especially when you have talents that weren't worth taking or abilities that weren't worth using, they had to do something to make them worth using. Yeah, so some stuff got buffed, some stuff got nerfed. It was a big juggle. We're going to see more number tweaking, including hopefully including working on the spec balance, because I'm a little concerned that Marksman is a chunk behind, and they're not that tiny bit behind that makes it kind of a gray area. They're definitely not worth being Marksman right now, according to the numbers we have. But there may still be things. That's the other thing to keep in mind. There may still be things that we're calculating incorrectly, because we continue to find bugs in the beta. And one of the most sort of pernicious bugs out there is tooltip bugs. Because like sometimes we rely on tooltips to tell us like how much armor we have. And maybe we're not actually getting as much armor as the tooltip says we are. And those are the kind of bugs that can really easily slip past the theory crafters and the sim crafters and stuff, right? And right now there's some of those that going on that actually I'm giving armor as an example because this is one I ran into this morning, where it's showing that pet armor is exactly equal to hunter armor, but even if it's a tenacity pet, which should have 20% more. Whereas historically, pets always had a base armor and inherited a percentage of ours rather than just equaling. So that seems weird. But then the fact that tenacity pet armor doesn't get the 20% boost, I'm like, oh, I don't know. Is that wrong? Or is it just the tooltip is screwed up?
Right. And
So
is there any way to, and you can't really test that, I suspect, or?
you can.
I mean,
It's ridiculously hard to actually test for armor. Testing for armor is especially without a target dummy that you can just attack forever. But testing for armor on your pet, that's a tough one. But you can because you get something to attack with low enough, consistent enough physical damage that you can keep your pet healed up. But it's a hugely time consuming process. So I'm hoping we get some kind of clarification from Blizzard on that, frankly, so we don't have to test it.
yeah. And the other thing, too, when it comes to these changes, obviously we'll probably get a couple more changes to the numbers and things before Miss Pandaria goes live. But then we usually get another set of changes once the raid season begins and they actually get the raid parses and they see the whole, wider population of players posting their numbers. And that's when we usually get another patch that changes things even further.
Yeah, I mean, very commonly what we will see is we'll see more tweaks throughout the beta, and then we'll see some last second patch right before it goes live. We'll see another patch before Mists of Pandaria releases. We'll see another patch or 2 or 3 or 4 right after Mists of Pandaria releases. Those are normally bug fixes. But yeah, then usually it's that a month in or something as the raid season goes, which historically has always been where the one hunter spec that's overperforming gets nerfed into the ground. In Wrath, BM's way too good. And then in Cataclysm, it was Survival. It was way too good, got nerfed in the ground. And then both the times they got unnerfed a little bit, but we're still kind of weak. Survival eventually got fixed. BM never did. So hopefully we're just not the ones with our necks stuck up a little too high for once. That's been the case certainly for the last 2 expansions.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, well, we also had some blue posts. Do you want to go over this aim shot thing?
Yeah, let's do that. So this was a note from Zahara, who's been very active on the forums all the time and been getting some good interaction with Ghostcrawler. But this was her question. She sort of said, is there a design purpose in why aim shot, power shot, and barrage all suppress auto shot? He says it seems strange to me that 2-second cast time shots do not, and the 2.9 and 3.0 3-second cast times ones do. And then she says, for MM in particular, it seems to conflict with the design of the mastery, since suppressing auto shot will reduce wild quiver procs, and long cast time shots means less chances for wild quiver procs as well. So she said this potentially creates micromanagement benefit that I thought was intended to be removed when auto shot was changed to work while moving. So she's saying, hey, auto shots are being suppressed by these big abilities. Now we have to start thinking about what we're doing here and where our auto shots are when we're firing.
It was definitely, for a while. Yeah, for a while it was, it was always this thing where aim shot was this weird exception that it both turned off your auto shot but also reset your auto shot timer. And then now all of a sudden barrage and power shot. Now we have this whole host of abilities that work in this I kind of agree with Zahara, this kind of antiquated way.
Yeah. So Ghostcrawler replied, and I guess we were sort of hoping and saying this is a bug and you'll see it fixed in the next build, but no, that's not what he said, is it? And he said No, he said aim shot should feel different, like you're distinctly pausing to precisely aim a perfect shot. He says that's mostly a kit thing. He says in terms of gameplay, it reinforces that arcane shot should usually be your primary focus dump, but aimed being a better dump during periods of high haste is cool and something that we do intend to continue supporting. And he says power shot was in a similar boat, but we changed our mind on that in order to help balance the talent row. In the new build going up now, it no longer interrupts auto shot. It says barrage still seems weird to allow autos during, but it gives you more wild quiver procs on average, so handles the balance concern.
Yeah, and I think I kind of disagree with that one in particular. Like,
Mhm.
I can see his point with aim shot. Because essentially what it comes down to, frankly, is, he's saying, like, we don't want you to use... And he's basically saying we don't want you to use aim shot as your default rotation, but we're
Exactly.
okay with you using aim shot as a kind of a risky alternative of like, oh, I think I can stay still for a while, but boy, am I going to be screwed if I have to move. He's like, we're okay
Right.
with that. We'll support that,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't be your default dump shot.
Right. He's also saying if you have some haste proc that's going to reduce the cast time, yeah, go ahead and use it. And he was seemed to be okay with that as well.
And it's, but essentially what it comes down to is it does, by suppressing auto shot, that means aim shot can do that much more damage when it lands, which is great for PvP, for that PvP opener, right?
Yeah.
So there is sort of a trade-off there. But then, yeah, when it gets into barrage, like, it just seemed weird that you could still be firing while you're doing a barrage. Like, well, does it seem weird that you can still fire while you're firing steady shot or cobra shot? Because, at some point, let's just try to get our mechanics to line up nicely rather than having, this bunch of mechanics in one bucket and a bunch in another bucket. I guess I'm kind of okay with exceptions from just a design perspective. I don't mind exceptions like, ooh, here's the one that works differently. But it crosses a line once your exception becomes a bucket, and then you just have weird categorization of these abilities work like this,
Yeah.
and these abilities work the other way, and it's just a little less elegant, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I never quite understood trying to come up with sort of a story or a realistic explanation as to why things fire this way or don't fire that way. I mean, it just at some point, you have to just focus more, like I say, on the mechanics and just consent that this is a game and we have to program things, and so I don't know why they have to make calls like that based on what might actually happen in a real life situation when it's just such a fantasy based game. As we've talked about in the past, they mail you send you dragons in the mail. I mean, we can live with auto shots firing whenever else you're firing.
Right. And so at some point you're better off, because the suspension of disbelief is kind of a poor argument because that already happens during other shots, like, like your steady shot, your cobra shot. And at some point, maybe it's just better to go the better design route and having a little bit more elegant and consistent mechanics. So the other big blue post we got, which I thought was really interesting, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot as I've been lately doing a whole bunch of work on patch 5.0 prep. I'm working on sort of my big guide to preparing your hunter for patch 5.0. And one of the one huge change, obviously all of our talents are changing, blah, 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 blah. One of the big changes in patch 5.0 is suddenly we're going to need expertise.
Yeah, that's the big one. I agree with you there.
And it's a big one because, now don't get me wrong, the amount of hit rating we need to be hit capped is going down, not just because we go to 8% to 7.5%, but the actual combat rating conversion is dropping as well. So we're going to need like 200 less hit rating in order to be hit capped. But still, we're going to need this crap ton of expertise, which doesn't exist on any of our gear now. It's not going to be a problem in mists, but it's a problem for this patch 5.0 period. And so somebody brought up a point, and incidentally, the way around that is basically going to be to try to make sure you're hit capped through your gear without reforging, so that you can dedicate all your reforging resources to expertise, basically, is the way to do it. But so somebody brought up a really good point related to this, which is the obvious one that, like, well, wait a minute, if we need to spend a whole bunch of our itemization budget to get the same amount of our shots hitting as we have now, that's a DPS loss. And so somebody, commented like, hey, I've been on the latest build for a bit. I wanted to chime in. If the goal was for us to do roughly the same DPS once these changes reach live as we do already, you guys probably overshot some of the nerfs. And it's like, I don't know how useful non-level 90 data, blah, 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 blah. So Ghostcrawler replied basically saying, he said, when you jump into the big rule-changing patch, which is patch 5.0, right, the pre-expansion patch, our intent is not for your DPS to change much. And then he went on to say, and I'm very happy to hear him say this, hunters may be in a special situation because of the expertise change. I'll have to dig into that more. And then Ghostcrawler talked about like level 87 and other stuff that isn't really relevant to the question. But so basically, goes close saying like, yeah, maybe we are actually just gonna nerf your DPS which it sucks because historically the pre-expansion patch hit and your DPS went up. Also, you're like, oh
Yeah,
my
easy.
god,
Yeah.
woo! That
Everything was out of whack. Everybody's DPS went up. I know going into, I think, Cataclysm,
Cataclysm went down.
it went down, and healers had to kind of relearn a whole bunch of things too. They were impacted. So at least for us, raiding was initially problematic because the healers didn't know what the heck they were doing.
Right, and it's just I remember when the patch 2.0 came out and patch 3.0 came out, and all of a sudden you were waffle stomping your raids because like everybody's DPS is like ridiculously higher, their tanking is better, their healing is better, and so the raids that you were struggling your way through, or even the stuff that was on farm, you suddenly just tore through, and then in Cataclysm that wasn't the case, and I'm concerned right now that in Mist you may be in that situation again, where all of a sudden you're like, oh crap. Of course, the worst possible situation is everybody else gets better and your class gets worse.
Right.
So it's entirely possible that our DPS is going to go down because of that expertise change. Where basically, if you assume that they convert everything correctly, and our DPS would be the same, except we now have to give away a whole bunch of our mastery or haste or crit. I mean, a lot of it to reach that expertise cap. It makes sense that our DPS would be going down because they're just changing the way we spend our itemization budget, and they're doing it for good reasons because the way we were spending our itemization budget before was different from every other class in the game. And I think there was good reasons for them to do it. But yeah, when all of a sudden you need, I think it's like 769 expertise rating that we're going to have.
And that's at level 85?
At level 85. Yeah, so at level 85, like 200, we're going to get basically 200 back for hit. So it still becomes like 570, mastery or haste or even crit that we're going to have to get rid of just so that we can essentially still be hit capped. That's basically what it comes down to. Expertise and hit are essentially the same thing.
Yeah, that's going to be problematic. I mean, I guess it's just something we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, so we're losing 570 secondary stat itemization, and that's.
I guess the question is that's probably mostly needed if you want to continue raiding and doing those types of things. I mean, if you're stopped raiding and you're just going to go and wait for Mr. Pandaria and start leveling, you probably don't need to go through all those hoops.
Actually, I disagree.
Really?
Because the general rule of thumb is once you're actually ready to start leveling, right? Because we'll have 2-3 weeks with patch 5.0 and hanging out. When you want to start leveling, the rule of thumb has always been, yeah, you know what? If you're going to start leveling, it's worth your while because you won't if you have raid gear, you're not going to replace that raid gear. Most of that raid gear, you're not going to replace until you get close to the new cap. Right, because
at least the first two zones probably don't have much to offer in the way of upgrades. Maybe a cloak or whatever, but that's about it. But I mean,
what usually happens is you get like level 88 or level 89 gear that has better itemization, but it has no gems, no sockets, and you're probably not going to waste your money on an enchant.
Yeah, and you don't have your tier bonuses and other things like
that.
Right,
good point.
So you're missing all those things.
But even just but even just your sockets and enchants are usually enough to be like, yeah, this item does have better itemization, but I have better overall stats with my raid gear because your raid gear is so badass. So normally it's not until you get like that 89, 90 point that you're really replacing all your gear, and frequently you're replacing it with blues. At 90, maybe there'll be some greens to replace it. But so the end result is you're hanging on to that gear for most of your leveling process. You're hanging on to most of that gear. There's always like the exceptions. It's always like, oh, I got 86 and now I've just replaced my wrists. But most of it you'll hang on to. And so except the combat ratings change. So what that means is, the amount of crit you need to have 1% crit changes at 86 and 87 and 88 and 89.
Right, so your damage starts going down as you start going up.
So as you go up levels, your damage goes down only because your gear is so grossly overtuned for 85 right now. And the biggest section of that is hit. So generally what you've always wanted to do is like, if you're going to go into leveling, have way more hit than you need because pretty soon you're going to be missing.
Yep. I mean,
And
fair enough. And I
that's
don't know how much you end up missing, but I know you can kill the stuff.
right.
Okay,
But so
you're
now
not going
that
to have a problem with it.
yeah, but now that's going to be much bigger because you're going to have that expertise,
Yeah.
right? Where it used to be like, oh, now I'm level 86 and I'm missing 1% of the time. Now I'm 87 and I'm missing 3% of the time. Well, now it's going to be like, now I'm 86 and I'm missing 1% of the time and being dodged 7.5% of the time.
Yeah.
So I think even if you're not planning on raiding, it's worth stacking your hit and expertise so that as you level, you don't have, because you got to keep in mind, it's not the way randomness works can screw you, right? Because it might be all
Yes.
of auto shots hit, but you're flipping aim shot
Or
and
something misses.
explosive shot completely. Keep in mind, your explosive shot misses, you lose all ticks. So yeah,
True.
it's
I mean, but you could probably get by. I know you can get by and kill things and level without it, but it will slow you down, and fights will take longer, especially the higher you get. But
and so I guess I feel like if your goal is to optimize, because okay, it is worth pointing out, which I think Darkbrew you kind of were getting at. You can be in greens, and your cat can be dancing on your keyboard, and you'll still kill things and level.
yes,
But I mean, if you're really interested in optimizing your leveling process, it's still worth getting. Um, it's still worth getting those stats.
yeah, it doesn't hurt. I mean, certainly we'll probably do some rating and things. So I mean, I'll end up doing it on Dark Brew. I don't know how much gold and things I want to spend to reforge. I'll probably end up doing it on my other hunters as well.
Yeah,
But you can certainly get by. Like I said, the it's certainly designed so that you don't need the 397 and the heroic level gear to level. I mean, you should be able to do it with a. Well, I don't know if you can do it as a fresh 85. How easy that would be. I think that might be a little bit harder if you're just in like quest greens and blues from leveling straight through. That might be a little bit more harder for you to get through.
possibly. But keep in mind, there is a point at which there has been expertise gear that we could have taken.
Mm-hmm.
Not at the raid level, really, but there is expertise gear for enhancement shamans that we just ignore. So theoretically, a hunter leveling through now or in Mists of Pandaria would be taking that gear too.
Yeah, right now there's like one ring that drops off the new gunship battle that happens to have agility and expertise.
Yeah, what's that ring called again?
I can't remember, and it's not even like a I think it's one. I don't know if it's a rand. It doesn't drop very often either. That much I know.
Yeah.
But there is one ring with expertise agility that we could use.
It's it's horrible. See, so we also have this thing where somebody asked a whole bunch of questions, which I thought some of these questions were really weird ones. I'm really surprised Ghostcrawler answered, because these are questions that nothing has changed from the way they work on live.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody's like, oh, is Wild Quiver procced when the ranged attack casts or when it hits?
And I think the context for this, he was working on one of those simulation programs. It was just trying to get information to make sure to confirm that they had things programmed properly. I think that was
right. But it still kind of surprised me that Ghostcrawler even stepped in and answered, because normally when somebody asks a question that's like already known information, they don't, because we test all of this stuff at the beginning of Cataclysm, and yeah, I mean, your Wild Quiver procs when the shot lands. If it misses or dodged, you don't proc it. It can't proc itself, all that stuff. Which is a bunch of questions related to that. Can Murder of Crows trigger Wild Quiver? And Ghostcrawler's like, no, obviously it doesn't. There's a question about focus regen, which is sort of easily enough tested. He did point out that Kill Command does not refund focus on a miss or dodge. And the way this goes is it's not actually a refund, but like if I cast Explosive Shot and it misses, that Explosive Shot only costs me 20% of what it otherwise should have. So you could argue that's getting refunded 80%, but realistically, at least from what I've been able to see, you never actually pay the full cost. You only pay 20% of what it would have cost. And so Kill Command was still costing the full amount, even if it got missed or dodged. And Ghostcrawler's like, yep, that shouldn't be happening. We're fixing it. which is good to know. Also, they do point out the issue with focus fire. That focus
Right.
fire is now on the global cooldown, which is the thing that made it not worth using. Um, and Ghostcrawler confirmed that, well, he didn't really confirm that it was supposed to be. He sort of implied that it was and just mentioned that, they buffed focus fire, they nerfed frenzy, so hopefully it'll be worth using.
Hmm.
Which, I think it will. I think the nerf of frenzy combined with the buff to focus fire, I think was the key. I still would have rather they, just took focus fire off the freaking global cooldown because that's going to add an additional complication to the BM rotation now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even though you were still pressing it on your own, it was just nice to not have it,
But right, because
interfere with your shots. I mean, you could
right,
macro it theoretically, but that was always a bad idea to do.
right, and you can't. Yeah, right, exactly. It was a bad idea because of the timing of it. So macro
Yeah,
rain wasn't possible. It wasn't possible to automate it in a optimal way. And yeah, now it's, now you're doing it instead of casting a shot, which shifts your rotation off and just I think adds complexity that without any real need for it. I suspect we're not going to see it changed because I think we're late enough in the beta that they're now interested in just tweaking numbers and not adjusting mechanics if they can avoid it.
yeah. I mean, the hunters are fun, but we did get a lot more buttons and things to press now. We did get quite a fair number of abilities
Yeah,
that we need
yeah.
to, fit in more keybinds and things like that, which has always been an issue. But it seems like now we've got even more tools to play with.
Mm-hmm. All right, so should we move on to Q&A?
Yeah, we actually have a bunch this week.
We have a bunch and not a lot of time. Let's see what we can get through. So Sindra the Hunter says, "Hey, Ollie, any chance Frost might give out some suggestions for heroic raid gear for once the 5.0 patch comes out? I'm a bit worried that with the changes to hidden expertise that my DPS is going to take a nosedive. So heroic raid gear meaning Cataclysm? Or heroic... Oh, I see. Yes. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, I will be making a patch 5.0 guide. And amongst other things, it is going to include some gear suggestions. But I can tell you right now, the gear suggestions will just come down to, here's some gear you can get that has hit rating on it,
Right.
so that you can reforge into expertise. But I
Right.
will list out some specifics.
Yeah, and if you're doing heroic raids, try and get that ring with expertise.
That gunship ring. Yeah.
That's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anytime you just get some expertise without having to reforge into it. But otherwise, yeah, we're going to have to reforge into into that whatever 970, 770, 770, 770, I think 769. Because we reforge into that 769 expertise, and that's just going to be costly. But otherwise, yeah, the way to prep your gear, and I'll come up with some specific suggestions. But you can just glance on Wowhead; it's pretty obvious. There's a decent number of hit rating options, and right now, I feel like a lot of hunters, certainly a lot of hunters I know, are reforging into a lot of hit. And we're going to want to do the opposite. We're going to want to try to get the gear with a hit on it as much as we can.
Yeah, I'll have to look and see how much of my reforging into hit. I mean, it's a combination of both. I mean, you're reforging out of it too. I mean, just to get things balanced out nicely to get to that 961. So it may be that you'll certainly stop reforging out of it and then work with the other pieces of gear after that.
Yeah. Okay, what's our next question?
The next one comes from Focus Shot, and he says, Euripides isn't here today because he's busy gearing his newly leveled druid.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, we heard, I think Layla sent us a tweet or something that I don't know what server it was, but she saw a druid named Euripides on there. So I think Focus Shot may be right here. This could explain quite a bit.
Yeah, but in terms of he's got a question.
He does have a question. The question is about fervor. He says, in the macro it to every one of your shots, making it brainless. Your thoughts? He says, that's my question for today. I might not be on longer. Busy day, lol.
Yes, fervor doesn't trigger the global cooldown, so as a result, you can macro it into your shots. But I think that's okay because I think it's probably a really bad move to do that. You got to keep in mind, fervor restores 50 focus instantly.
Right.
and then it has the focus over time effect. And so if you macroed into every one of your shots, and if you happen to be at 50, just over 50 focus when you hit a shot, which frequently are, right? You've got that whole range that you're trying to stay in the middle of. And when you're saving up for your kill commands or something, you might well be substantially over 50. Then you'll waste a bunch of it. So I suppose you could try to adopt a play style where you're staying as low on focus as possible and only getting, because you only need like 40 focus for kill command, and just trying to make sure you never go above 50. But that's really hard to do, especially with your your Cobra shot now restoring 14 focus. Your plus your base focus, 4 focus per second, plus your haste. It's really hard to stay under 50 focus and never be delaying your signature shot. So I think that's probably not going to end up being an optimal way to play. I think if you do that, you will frequently end up shaving off 5 focus here, 10 focus there, 3 focus there. So my hunch is that that's just going to be a bad way to play. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree that anything like that you'd probably want to micromanage. I mean, shouldn't be that hard to do. It's got a relatively short cooldown too, 30 seconds, so it should be available to you most any time that you really need it. So I would say it's probably worth just hanging on to it and using as needed. Somebody in the chat room even pointed out that's probably good for when you're really low on focus and need a bunch really quick, which would make sense. So I think it's the kind of thing your benefit will be from not macroing it and just managing it yourself and using it for situations and figuring out situations where, hey, all right, now's a good time. Maybe you're going to have a big burst situation where you're going to need to burn through a bunch of focus. So maybe you make sure you load up ahead of time or reload or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's going to be boss fights where it's worthwhile holding off on it a little bit. I think for the most part, it's going to be one of those like, oh, fervor's up. I'm going to hit it after my next signature shot.
Yeah.
Because then I know I'm going to get full use out of the focus. And I think you would find that I have a feeling that you would find that maybe the difference is small. Maybe it's like a stutter stepping thing from back in Wrath and before. But I think you might find it's one of those things that, one of the differences between the really good hunter and just your average hunter, that would be one of them. All right. So our next question comes from Esndevip, who says he thinks that Euripides is actually here on the podcast today, but he's in camouflage. His question is, for BM, what's the best way of using multi-shot? Capping focus and dumping it, or using 1 Cobra and 1 multi-shot on repeat? Okay, so are we talking about now on Cataclysm? Okay, so basically, let's answer this question. This question has 2 answers. Maybe 3 answers. There's situations.
And he's saying he's talking about Cataclysm, but we can talk about what to do with MOP too, because it's interesting to see. Cause I'm sure I think it'll be different.
Well, MOP is interesting. Is significantly different because it also depends what you do for the AOE talent tier. But so Cataclysm is much easier. Cataclysm number 1. Sometimes fight mechanics will dictate what you should do. Like, oh, here's a whole bunch of mobs that are going to come up on a certain timer and they need to be burned down. Okay, I want to make sure I'm almost at full focus so I can fire as many multi-shots as possible, which, in the absence of Big Red Pet, is 2. So realistically, as long as if your group is staying up for a significant period of time, there's no practical difference between going up to 80 and firing 2 versus a couple Cobra shots and a multi-shot, Cobra shot, multi-shot, couple Cobra shots. There's no practical difference unless the only difference comes with when the mobs are going to die. However, if you're going to be using Big Red Pet, you're then much better off saving up to full focus, hitting Big Red Pet, because now you're only spending 20 focus for those multi-shots, and you want to get as many as possible in that narrow little window of time, right? And usually you want to Big Red Pet, multi-shot, 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 fervor, multi-shot, multi-shot, multi-shot. So yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, if it's okay, as Navip's saying, it's for long-lasting trash packs. If Big Red Pet is not available, yeah, it's just whatever. I typically what I usually do is I'll fire two multi-shots because typically, trash pack, you've got your misdirect up and you're at full focus. So I fire two, and then just whenever I have enough focus to fire another one, I fire another one. It's not a big deal for long-lasting trash packs.
No, for the
So,
trash, I don't know that much matters. But boss fights with ads, certainly I would think that depending on what the mechanic, like thinking of a fight like Yorshaj or something, if you're for in Dragon Soul where there's definitely some ad phases, that's one where you might, and if you're BM, you might want to make sure you have Big Red Pet ready so you could just spam
yeah.
multi-shot and get a lot more off and get those ads down and things like that.
Absolutely. And then, as Navip also points out, Frost, you were wrong. The Worm and Chimera abilities haven't gone away. And he's absolutely right. On the beta right now, Worm
Yep.
and Chimera still have their AoEs, which is, for the Worm, we'll have to do some math because it might turn out that the net damage of the Worm, actually, it's almost certain that the net damage of the Worm AoEing is less for a single target fight because you can't kill command because it's burrowed. But for the Chimera, you still can use your whole rotation while it's firing. And I still gotta think that's going to change because if it doesn't, the answer is going to be always use a Chimera every hunter because it does more damage. Because it does all its normal damage, plus it breathes fire. Unless they make the fire breath just really weak. Because there's also some issues right now with on the beta with pets having enough focus to get off their abilities. And that's still bouncing around where it's like, oh, because it has to do with how the new Wild Hunt, which is built in, works, but they're basically focus starved all the time unless you're BM. And as a result of which, you're finding that because all these other abilities have a focus cost other than their basic abilities, they're not actually getting their basic abilities off. And also they're not having focus left over for Thunderstomp or for Dash. And so they made some changes to the cost of stuff to try to fix that, but I feel like that's still not in an ideal situation. I really think that they should be like, I don't know. Part of me feels like they should just make the basic attacks have a focus cost and nothing else have a focus cost. But part of me also feels like, well, we have this focus resource. It makes sense that their ability should all cost some amount of focus, but of course the problem is figuring out how to get the pet AI to do that optimally without having us to micromanage it. I think the easy solution there is, basic attacks cost focus, nothing else does. Move on with your life.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the math comes out with the Chimera. I mean, it's also keep in mind that's an exotic pet, so that's BM only, but BM's looking pretty good right now, so those two might go hand in hand together.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to point out in the chat room, Focus Shot has a comment. What about the new ability they gave to pets? It makes pets do 80% more damage or something. Are you possibly talking about combat experience? Because actually, this is something that just today, when I was going through.
I was talking about the 100% more damage when above 50% focus.
Okay, so what that is that's basically Wild Hunt. Was it Wild Hunt? Whatever. That's an existing ability that's now baked into pets, where pets' basic attacks now, if they have over 50 focus, the basic attack costs twice as much focus and does twice as much. Actually, does a little bit more than twice as much. Shh. And that's just a way to make sure that your pets never get focus capped. So if you have better and better focus regen, your pets can use it more and more. And that's the heart of the problem, because thus if your pets ever have extra focus to use for dash or something, they burn it on their basic attack instead. But pets do have an ability called Combat Experience, which is really weird to me, as I also don't know if the tooltip is wrong. But this is a spec ability called Combat Experience that increases all damage done by your pets by 50%. I don't know if this is a real thing or not, because every pet spec has it. And there's not a lot of point in creating a pet spec ability that increases the damage your pet does by 50%. At that point, just make pets do 50% more damage and don't make it a special ability. It's weird. I don't know if that's a tooltip thing, or hopefully we'll get an answer on that in the near future. Okay, what else have we got?
Rec writes in, he says, Euripides is not attending the show because he's busy CCing his wife, so she won't replace him on the show.
Ah!
And then his question, he says, right based on SimCraft results posted on MMO Champion Hunters. It says Hunters are at the bottom end of the damage meter, so the highest spec doing 101k BM when Arcane Mages are doing almost 130k DPS. If Blizzard decides that we need a buff, what do you think they will do?
Well, there's a couple things going on here. Actually, that's really interesting. 101k on BM. Woo, that's a lot higher than the numbers that I'm calculating with my gear levels. But a couple things going on here, right? When you have a difference between 130k and 101k, that's a huge difference. That's a problem. The goal is to get those numbers closer together, which isn't always accomplished by raising the lower number up. So it's possible the solution is, hey, yeah, there's these other classes we haven't got around to doing the big, horrible tuning like we just did on Hunters, and maybe they're going to come down. I do think we're going to see that Hunters are going to come up. My first thought when I saw all these nerfs was, yep, I think they went too far. And you know what? Let me just say, when you're in a situation, I think they made the right move by nerfing Hunters too far. Let me put it that way. If you're in a situation that they were in, that like a class was clearly too good, and still in the beta, they got to change the numbers. And like as Ghostcrawler said, they brace yourself to his staff for all the complaints that always happens. So when you're in a situation where class is clearly too good, it has to be nerfed. I think just from like social theory, the right way to do it is nerf it a little too much so that then you can tweak it back up because everybody's happy to see the buffs, as opposed to risking nerfing it not enough and then having to nerf it more, which will just piss people off more.
Yeah, so it really does.
Yeah. So I do think we're going to see Hunters increase a little. I think we're also going to see some other class numbers decrease. As for Arcane Mages, though, they have a long freaking history of doing more damage than they rightfully should do. I think everybody can agree on that. And I know their rotation, at least in Kata, it's more complicated than the 2-button rotation everyone talks about, but it's a simple flip and rotation. It's not that complicated managing their cooldowns. And for the fact that they've been so, and sometimes it's fire, sometimes arcane, but mages have been just higher than they should be on damage meters for a long time. And I would never say that a class should be below average, but I think they should put a bunch of extra attention into making sure that mages and arcane mages are right in the average.
Here.
Yeah, and not sticking up by a huge amount.
And the nice thing too, it's better to be over nerfed in the beta with the hope that they might ratchet some of these numbers up before the thing goes live, rather than to have it all happen after it's all been released. So maybe there's some hope there that we'll see them continue to tune these further in the upward direction if they've gone too far.
Yeah. So I do, but in terms of like how they'll buff Hunters, I have no flipping clue. I feel like there's still abilities that need tweaking, talents that need tweaking, but that's mostly to bring them in balance, so they're worth taking. It wouldn't be an overall buff. I think Marksman probably could greatly benefit from having its mastery unnerfed. That 15% nerf to Wild Quiver, get rid of that. But I think that's not enough to bring Marksman. That alone probably isn't enough to bring Marksman up, and which makes Steady Shot a really easy target. I would have to I haven't played around with Marksman numbers since the big change on live, so I'd have to take a look and see what their Chimera Shot is like, whether there's room for that to go up or not. But Chimera Shot, Steady Shot, and Wild Quiver are the obvious things for Marksman. But to increase Hunter DPS across the board, I don't know. I mean, maybe they could keep playing with Arcane Shot.
Yeah, that seems to be the one they've tweaked with a fair bit here. I don't know. They make it. You'd think they would have done everything they possibly could with that, because obviously if it gets too strong, then you don't want it to be better than Explosive Shot, because then Survival Hunters will ignore Explosive Shot and just use Arcane Shot, and so they've had all sorts of issues trying to balance that out. So I don't know. You think they would have figured that one out?
It surprises me that that's such an issue. It's just one of those it shouldn't be hard to make your signature shot clearly more damage than your focus dump. But that's been the situation. That situation, as I recall, came up in the Cataclysm beta as well, where they were having issues with explosive versus arcane for mastery or for survival, and it really sort of highlights the fact that explosive shot doesn't do crazy amounts more damage. That's because survival gets so much. I mean, survival gets a lot of damage. From Black Arrow, but B, the Serpent Sting also contributes a big portion. And they, do with their mastery, they do so much more damage with all those elemental shots. Alrighty, so Shroud Viper has no question, but he says, "I think I know where Euripides is. There's a druid gathering here in Canada, and he's there to see if he can tame a few of them." Indeed. Oh my goodness, are we 5 minutes over?
We are. We're getting there. But I think we've got one more chat question, and then I guess we're done.
And it's short.
Yeah, this was from Leylawin, and she says, "Guys, did you see that there will be a reskin of the BRK 1000 in-game?" And apparently it's the Airship Marines sharpshooter from the Alliance quest Unleash Hell in the Jade Forest.
Which is kind of cool because I always thought that the BRK 1000 was a fantastic tribute to BRK because it was, at the time, an end game gun, the best gun in the game.
It really was.
Semicolon, however, comma, because it only came from that flippin' tribute run, very few hunters got their hands on it.
Yeah, and it's no longer obtainable in the game, even worse. So
right. I'm happy that they have a read that they're basically reusing the model, but it's just not the same if it's not called the BRK 1000.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And who knows? Maybe the black auction market house or whatever it is that they're the black market auction house. Maybe that's an opportunity for them to slip the BRK 1000 back into the game and allow people to spend some gold and get it there.
That's an excellent call. They should really do that with any item that's been named after someone that can. Hey, did we ever talk about Michelle and her cat in the game?
Yes,
we did. I guess
okay.
I think that was the week you were gone. We touched upon that briefly, but that was very cool. Yeah. So not even an in-game item. We're talking about NPCs and all sorts of stuff going on. She's got her own little home in Azeroth.
She does. And
asbestos free, I assume, right?
Well, that's where she's staying until the asbestos situation gets taken care of. Apparently, hanging out in Pendar. One last bit of news. Did you say?
Beta version for people to check out.
You cut out there.
Oh, I was just saying. I noticed also just published today on the WoW Hunters Hall a few minutes ago that Zahara has released a public beta version of her FemaleDwarf.com.
Oh, yes, she has. I
don't know if it's been out for a while or if it's just today kind of thing, but I was not aware that there was a public version yet. So
yeah, and I haven't actually looked at the public version of the beta, but as I recall, the version of the beta that I was playing with of hers still didn't have glyphs. But yeah, I mean, if you want to start playing around with, and I believe the public version of the beta, it's just so you guys know, it's a level 90. So this isn't. I hope she makes another version for level 85 during patch 5.0. I really hope she makes a version of that because that's, one of those things that selfishly I don't want to do all of this work for level 85 patch 5.0 as well as for level 90.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know that she'll do that. That might be too much work for her. I'm not sure.
Right, for something that's going to be in existence for 3 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
right.
That's the big kicker. But, so I mean, it is beta.femaledwarf.com. So if you guys want to go play around with some of the optimizations, just keep in mind that things are changing a lot and that, to my knowledge, not all optimization options are in there yet. So take it with a grain of salt. It's not the clean, awesome, polished female dwarf that you guys are used to playing with. But it's a good way of getting a sort of a look how some of the different abilities fare for different specs, and taking a look at what's going on with some of the stat weights and stuff. And I'll give you a stat weight hint right now that I can say without even looking at it. Hit and expertise will always be worth the exact same amount.
Just to toss this in, when I was looking for the information on the airship marine sharpshooter, there apparently is another game gun that looks like the BRK. It's called the Diplomat or something like that.
The Diplomat had the same model as the BRK?
That's what the WoW had said.
Yeah, apparently it did. The different skin colorings, and like the BRK looks the nicest of the bunch.
Well, yeah, but if you can't get the BRK, then just an option. Although
I think I used to have the Diplomat. I don't remember that looking like BRK.
But I don't know if the Diplomat is Alliance only as well, because if it's an Alliance quest in the Jade Forest, then Horde might be out of luck.
Yeah, they may have had a different version. I mean, it was off the Twins or whatever they're called, Fiola, Blightbane, that encounter. So they may have had different. They might have had a different equivalent. They might have had a gun or something that was a different model. Yeah, they probably would have been the wide barrel flintlock was their version. So they probably had one that looked like that.
Yeah, that was a really interesting experiment they did with the whatever it was called, the Coliseum thingamajobber. Mm-hmm. Wow, how can I not remember the name of that?
Trial of the Crusader.
Trial, yeah. I'm like, I remember TOTC. I don't remember what it stands for. That was a really interesting experiment where they gave the Horde and Alliance different, same stats, but different looking items. And I guess, I don't know if it was they just decided it was too much work to do again, or if they decided it failed because they made all the Horde stuff look so much cooler than the Alliance stuff that they pissed off the Alliance.
I don't know. But I always liked it. I always liked the Tier 9 set because it was more faction, specific. I mean, it was more you had the emblems and things like that. It was more faction aligned. I thought it was kind of a good looking set. That was I'll probably transmog into that at some point here, going into Pandaria, I think.
Yeah, that's certainly on my list of things to get done before Pandaria hits, is to complete my transmog set. And I think I want to go with, I don't remember what it's called, but there's some gun, speaking of Trial of the Crusader, that comes, some gun that you can get with like tournament points from that little tourney thing doing the daily quests over there. That's like some kind of blunderbuss that looks like it's a good dwarven gun. It looks like a warhammer. And
it's awesome. It's the whatever the blunderbuss of Kaz Modan, and it's
my God, it's
the dwarf vendor.
Yeah, blunderbuss of Kaz Modan. So I want to get that because I think that goes well with my tier 1 set. I want to kind of get that in my Giant Stalker to be my my Grandpappy Frostheim set, to be my transmog set of choice.
Yeah, that's a very cool looking gun, and I think you get it for 25 champion seals. So I don't even think that takes that long to do.
Oh, that's not too bad. Yeah, I don't remember. No, because I did that shit for so long.
You may already have it. I mean, you may have the seals already.
No, I don't know, because I spent them all on mounts.
Oh.
Or I spent them on rep. I think I was getting like reputation for everybody, so I could get mounts. I was using that to get exalted with all the factions or something. I don't remember exactly what. There was some reason for it at some point. Let me see. Oh, wait a minute. I have 22 champion seals.
Yeah, see, just do like 2 or 3 daily quests and you got it.
A couple dailies, then I can get the blunderbuss. Awesome!
So
I didn't realize I was that close.
When are you going to do your how to prepare for the night of September 25th articles?
Well, except honestly, the bigger one is how to prepare for patch 5.0, which will happen before Pandaria, right? That'll happen like a little bit into September. That's the big one, right? Because I'm sure I'll do how to, leveling in Mr. Pandaria thing. But that's much easier. It's the Kind of everything's changing, but you're staying level 85. And that one I'm going to try to get to certainly within the next 2 weeks. We'll see if I can get to it sometime this week.
Yeah.
I've kind of started working on some of the stuff to lead up to it, so I might end up, like I just did the big expertise guide, so I might do some other guides, because like leading up to it, I'm like, okay, well, because that's all about the patch 5.0 guide, where I'm like, okay, let's go look at the combat ratings that you need for expertise. I'm like, oh crap, I need them at level 85 too. And so as I gather the information for that, I might end up getting the information I need for some stepping stone guide and plug that in. But I mean, it's rough, because the one thing that everyone is going to want to hear is, what talent should I take?
Right.
And what glyph should I take? And it's like, well, dude, as we just saw on today's show, that's changing so much that I think it's a little irresponsible to go out and say, hey, here's what your talent choices, here's the best talents for these tiers. It's a little irresponsible to say that when you are pretty certain that that's going to change within a week or two.
Right. And you don't even want to do it with a disclaimer on there, because somebody will miss the disclaimer and then they'll make the wrong choice and blame you for that.
You should put up little sticky notes on your post, on your website, as opposed to an actual post, just a sticky note to show that it's that transient.
Yeah. But so if I happen to manage to get a lot of time, last week was just a really bad week for me, because there was all sorts of crazy work stuff going on in my day job that I was working a lot at night. But if I can manage to squeeze out some time and I don't encounter unexpected roadblocks, which happens, where I'm like, going along, like I think I have everything I need to have some writing. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I haven't confirmed this number, or I need to find this number. The beta's down. So if I don't encounter too many unexpected roadblocks, I might be able to get it done this week. But I mean, honestly, the biggest part of prepping for 5.0 is getting your hit gear and preparing to reforge and knowing what your expertise numbers are. All right, well, let's head into the outro then.
You have been listening to episode 140 of the Hunting Party Podcast. And a lot of stuff Euripides is supposed to say, but I'm not gonna.
And I'm Darkbrew from thebrewhall.com and the Brew Hall on Twitter.
And this is Frostheim from Warcraft Hunters Union, WoW Insider, and Frostheim WHU on the Twitters.
And I'm Ollie Sonder from the Hunting Party Podcast. You can check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or at our RSS feed to your reader. Links are available on the show notes.
And if you like us, please don't be shy about leaving us a review on iTunes or on YouTube. Especially mention how uncommonly good-looking Frostheim is.
You can submit a title for this week's show by emailing us at huntingpartypodcast@gmail.com and have your name mangled on the air.
Stay thirsty, my friends, and remember to drink your dark brew lager.
For the Horde!
And don't forget to pay your dues. So yeah, I don't know. I can't even think off the top of my head of a good title for today's show.
So we need people to send us some stuff. Oh, maybe we can call it like Euripides is a druid. That might work, since apparently he is a druid now, according to some reports. But
yeah, but
we can do better than that.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think we can get something better than that. Like I liked last week. I don't know if it ever actually came out. Has last week's show come out yet? Okay.
Yes, it came out yesterday.
Did we call it Not That Kind of Love?
Yes, we did.
Awesome.
Yes, like that was good. That was nice, and we identified it early on in the show. That was perfect. But yeah, this week, I don't know. Nothing particularly stood out as what we should call it.
Unless we just want to call it The Sky is Falling.
Yeah, that could work.
It's because I thought that was a nice Perseid shower, which won't be relevant by the time this goes out, but combined with all the nerfs.
I can jump shot, BM, MM, and SB. I can rock out any tree. Never worried about my threat, 'cause I've got FD and misdirect. Catching loose mobs in my traps. Now let's begin with Illidan, Osirian, and Gil'jaeden, Magdamar, Asgalor, Gruul, Cthulhu, and Razorgore, Onyxia to Ragnaros. Which one have we